Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. And a big shout out to those of you who have already signed up for our little memberships on the YouTube page. You can go to the YouTube page. You can see where it says subscribe to the show. We're right next to it is a word that's join. It's going to give you 3 different tiers of memberships that you can join. And we're going to make it worth it for you, folks. So do us a favor, go check it out. You want to do it, that's much appreciated. If you're not going to do it, you're still going to get all this stuff. It's just that if you want more of me, more of us, then you can pay for more of that. So there you go. Always much appreciated, regardless. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now, just kind of a little question and answer session about what is next for Adam Peters and the organization, some of the decisions they have to make coming up. So let's get to it. Today, I was going to spend time talking about a lot of the different coaches involved in this process. I'm going to stick on Ben Johnson because that's where the smoke is right now, right? This group, the Harris group, is being very, very secretive about what's coming out of there. So if you're hearing stuff, it's not coming from their group, okay? So anything is coming out of there. So when you hear somebody interviewed well, probably coming from their agent. So understand that. So when I say this, like I say it to say, if you hear so-and-so is the runaway favorite, just, slow your roll a bit. However, there's been a lot of smoke around him. And I've told you before that people in the league, this is where they expect him to end up. So with that being said, I want to spend some time talking more about him. And I'm going to have people on next week to talk more about him and Aaron Glenn and some of the other candidates. But let's stick today on Ben Johnson and I'll do this I'm going to do some of the stuff for the others where I'll talk about them, but I'm going to go a little bit more on Ben Johnson because of perhaps what we keep hearing and what people keep saying and whether or not he's the strong favorite to get it. Again, there's a lot of smoke right there right now. So a couple of things that some of the stuff that I've talked to people over the last couple of weeks, a lot of people about a lot of these candidates, just seeing who knows whom, and what do you think of this guy? What do you think of that guy? Talking to anybody I can about their dealings with them. Some of the things with Johnson is keep in mind, like that's a good offense in Detroit. Like that's a talented offense. That line was good before he got there. They've done a nice job with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and with Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Sam Laporta. That's a good Jared Goff. There's good talent in that offense. I don't know all of his input into bringing some of that talent on board. I don't know all, is the philosophy of the offense, is that coming from Dan Campbell and he's executing it? Is that more what Ben Johnson believes in? I also know that Ben Johnson's been in a lot of different offenses. So I think he's a pretty adaptable guy. And so I think it seems like he adapts to what he has because he can pull upon a number of different offenses from what he's experienced, whether in college, coaching, after that, et cetera. That's a good thing. He's not wedded to one system or another. And I think that's good because when you look at some of these quarterbacks in the draft, they're going to fit different systems. Not everybody's going to be the same. Not everybody's going to fit what Detroit is doing. I think that might be difficult. Just because it's different from what Jaden Daniels or even Drake May has been running. So who fits what you really want out of the quarterback position? That's going to be key. But how adaptable are you? Now, you can't just do everything and say, okay, I'm going to throw everything away and we're just going to run RPOs all day. I don't think you can do that because at some point you have to believe in what you're doing. And there's a philosophical belief to it, right? You can still be a running team, but based out of different ways. But I don't think you're going to just scrap everything you've done just to do one style. But point is, he's adaptable, as someone described as an amorphous scheme, because it's just, there's not necessarily one or the other. He pulls upon some Zach Taylor stuff from Sean McVay. He spent time with a number of different coaches over the years. And I think that's going to be a big factor for him. And I'll get to more of those coaching ties in a minute. The other thing that I think is impressive about some guys, like their background, their journey to get to this point. He was a walk-on at North Carolina. He was a quarterback at North Carolina, was a walk-on. And, while that in and of itself is like, okay, a lot of guys can do that. What I also like is that he played special teams. And in fact, he never played it down as a quarterback at UNC, but he did get on the field on special teams. And he talked in this one Detroit, I think it was Detroit Free Press story, where his big highlight on special teams was going against, if you remember Michael Johnson, defensive lineman, he was 6'7", 270 pounds in college. So he goes up against him in a special teams game on special teams, and he gets his hands in his chest plate and he knocks him over. And that's a massive highlight for a guy he's a walk-on quarterback to do that. So that's the kind of person he is. And, and you can listen, a lot of these other candidates, you're going to have some similar type anecdotes or tales, because there's a reason they're at where they're at. I don't want to make Ben Johnson out to be the greatest candidate ever, but when you're reading stuff and when you talk to people, you're going to hear good things. And there are some people in the past, and I talked to someone today about this guy years past, so he'll tell me like, yeah, I like that guy, but he's not a head coach. I'm not hearing that about Ben Johnson. I'm hearing like, I'll get to some of this in a minute, but you hear like there's some of the questions are, well, he hasn't done it, so you don't know, but nobody said it. And when they hired Jay Gruden, I think I talked to 10 people, 5 probably would have said that he should not be a head coach. So, there was a definite split right there with him. I'm not hearing that with some of these guys, especially like none of the guys I'm hearing that really about, but certainly not about Ben Johnson. Again, been around a bunch of different coaches, been around hard coaches, guys who coach him tough. Gary Tranquill was one of his coaches he's been around. He's from that Nick Saban, Bill Belichick school, very tough coaching. One of the things that, comes up with guys like that is, and this is something when you read about Ben Johnson, transparency, honesty. That's a big key in coaching as well. He was in Miami for 7 years. So you got Al Saunders. He's been around Mike Martz, Bill Lazor, who is a Washington coach way back in the day. Adam Gase, who has a good offensive mind, bad head coach, good offensive mind. Clyde Christensen, who coached Andrew Luck, who's coached, actually he's now at UNC. So he's coached Drake May, Sam Howell, but he was involved in the NFL for a long time. So he's been around a lot of different styles of offenses. Zach Taylor, another one, I brought up that earlier. So that leads you to a wide variety of schemes, systems, and it's why, I think it's something that can work. It helps develop a different type of mindset scheme that you're not wedded to anything. And I think there's a lot of learning that goes on because of that. And because of that, I think you have to be a very clear communicator to teach whatever you're going to try and teach. Philosophy, one of the things that it's funny, because one of the articles talked about his philosophy. I think it was in Detroit Free Press story. He said, one coach told him one time that you want to make the same things look different and the different things look the same. And when you watch the lines, and I've talked about this a couple of times with you guys, and when you watch the lines, they're going to run a play out of something that it's a basic play, but it looks different. Like that's really good football. And sometimes the difference is too, is the tempo. And when you're getting up to the line of scrimmage, or when you're, maybe you do something, a quick motion, then you're going, right? But there's sometimes it's just the same thing from a different look. And it's a basic play, but it looks really good because of how you dressed it up, right? And so I think like that's an offensive skill. That's innovation. Not a lot of, he doesn't use a lot of formations. I think on the play sheet for a game, I think there's like, the story I read was like 20 different formations. You're going to usually have a lot more. That's pretty good. And I think what that does is it cuts down, but within those 20, not 20 plays, it's 20 formations, but within that you can run 2 or 3 sets or 2 or 3 different plays off of those formations. And so that gives you the ability to have a complex offense, but yet maybe keep things a little bit, I don't want to say simpler, because simple is not the right word for using any NFL offenses, but I think it helps maybe guys learn things a little bit quicker. That's the hope. And, for a coach like that, that's what you have to hope, because otherwise it could be very difficult for a young quarterback to learn all that stuff. And what it does is allows you to kind of condense the formations and the verbiage within that. And so I think that's something that, is interesting as well. So I'll be curious to see if he ends up here, how that all plays out. But it certainly played out well in Detroit. But having a veteran quarterback, I think, also makes a difference with that. Having a veteran offensive line and some really good talent, all that stuff really matters. But I think when you watch the Lions, there's not like they execute very well. And so I think that's a big deal too. What we don't know again about Ben Johnson is what kind of a CEO or what kind of a coach would he be as a head coach, because we know what Dan Campbell can do as a head coach. And that's what we're seeing in Detroit. It's not, the X's and O's are great, but one guy sets the tone and the vision and the others are there to carry it out. And you have to, the best thing you can do as a coach, I was going to say it all the time, is to surround yourself with the right people, because if you don't have a shot in hell of winning. I don't care who you are. They could hire Ben Johnson, but if he doesn't hire a good staff, it's not going to work. They could hire Raheem Morris. If he hires a great staff, it's going to probably work, right? Same with Dan Quinn. I know, a lot of people don't want him here. Guy can coach, and if he doesn't hire the right staff, it doesn't matter. So, and I think one of the things for Johnson that helps is he does have, I think he's going to, because he's been, even though he's under 40 years old, he has been around a little bit. So he's got, I think, a lot of ties to some different people that you can bring on board with him. The other thing that you hear about him, it's funny because I was talking to a player near the end of this, actually it was the last day of the season when they were cleaning out their lockers. We were talking about offensive coordinators. He's like, whoever they brings in here, it has to be collaborative. And that means, it doesn't mean you just listen to the players and all that, but you take their input. And, certainly that word resonated with people here this year, something they really want, I think, probably more of. But it's something that you hear applied to Johnson. And one thing that different players, coaches will tell you that he's really good at being collaborative. And I think, again, when you're in that building, you want it to be collaborative. There were a number of times, and go check out this Detroit Free Press article, where players would say, hey, what about this play? Hey, run this, Taylor Decker would tell him, like, this guy can't get on this defensive end can't do this on this play. So they'd run a wide zone to that side to take advantage of that. Other players might come back and say, hey, the corner's sitting here. So he'd run a play to take advantage of that. That's being collaborative. It's also within your staff. One of the things with the Shanahan group that I thought was really impressive was exactly that. Like, you had a lot of brain power in that building, but if you don't tap into it, if it's not collaborative, it's not going to work. And I'll go back to Bieniemy for a second. And this is where I think he was hurt this year, was he didn't hire his staff. This is who was here for him. You need to hire your staff. And that's, I'm not going to say that's necessarily why it didn't work this year, but it certainly is an area where it didn't help, because I think it's important to have your staff, to hire your staff, so you have people who are ready and willing to carry out your vision. When you're inheriting people, are they gonna embrace your vision, or is it gonna be a little bit of a battle? So when you hire somebody, they are charged with carrying your vision out. If somebody's already here, and maybe they don't share the same vision, maybe there's a different, and again, that's one of the things I think what made this situation not ideal. But I'm going to go back to, the situation just never worked. So period, end of sentence. But for a guy like Johnson, that's going to be the big key, is who would you bring in? Now you hear names like Hank Fraley as an offensive line coach, that they bring him in. To me, if you're an offensive mind head coach, the number one position you have to hire, especially on offense, is the offensive line coach, in charge of protection, in charge of the run game, and certainly a guy that can help carry out your vision. Somebody who's worked with you is even better in this situation. And then, of course, defensive coordinator would be the other one, because that's not your side of the ball. And the one guy, it's funny because there's a guy in the linebackers coach in Detroit will get mentioned for, if Aaron Glenn leaves Detroit, even if Washington hires him or he goes somewhere else, then they have a linebackers coach, Kelvin Shepard, who would probably elevate to being a defense coordinator. So that would mean he might be on other teams' radar for that position. Whether or not Ben Johnson would bring him here, I don't know, but it would make sense if he's that highly thought of in Detroit, that somebody like that would be at least someone that you would have to consider as a D coordinator if he's going to stay there as a linebackers coach, and it would be a big promotion for him. So there you go. And I don't like, I'm not saying that's who we bring. I'm just throwing that name out there because he's a name that in Detroit you would hear as someone who could elevate to a DC role. And whether it's Aaron Glenn leaving or maybe somewhere else, if let's say Ben Johnson comes here. So one of the things, and what some other people are saying, and one of the things, I want to read this quote to you from Amon-Ra St. Brown about let's see, where's this quote here? So Amon-Ra told our Lions reporter for ESPN, Eric Woodyard, he said about one time early on when Johnson was in Detroit and he had to get up and explain, presenting red zone installs in front of the team. So other coaches get up there and they talk about, strategy, et cetera. And he said that, here's the quote, and I'm going to put it up there. So if you want to read it, you can see it. But what he said is the way he's explaining the plays, the way he's detailed with how we've got to run these routes in the red zone, I just knew the way he was talking to us, it just felt different. I told one of my teammates, I forgot who it was. I was like, bro, when Ben gets up there, he knows exactly what he's talking about. He's telling us what he sees in this play, what he wants to do. There's no gray area. It's super detailed. That's what you used to hear about guys like McVay and Kyle Shanahan, that level of confidence in them. And I think the super detailed is a big part of who he is. And I'm another quote about that in a minute. Zach Taylor told ESPN, he said that he had tried to hire him many times. He worked with them. I think it was in Miami, but he worked with them, tried to hire him many times, just never worked out. He called Ben Johnson, quote, brilliant. So that's some of what you hear. Former NFL head coach Joe Philbin said that of the Lions, like they execute at a high level. So that's to me is the big thing. It's not just because the schemes, like you can install plays, you can do this and that. It's the execution of that. And we didn't see that enough here. Like for all the detail talking all that, you didn't see the execution. It stunk at times. Like the receivers, the execution of that was not very good. And, not even blaming one person on that. I'll be clear on that. But the bottom line is it wasn't very good, especially in the pass game with the routes and all that. You just knew like there's sometimes like you shouldn't have 3 receivers in a 5-yard area being covered by 2 guys. And too often you would see that. Can't have that. Now, so that's one of the things, again, that Philbin said they executed at a high level. He's going to run some trick plays once in a while. It's funny because when trick plays work, it's great. When they don't, guys being too cute. Kyle Shanahan would get that. And I remember after he left, they said he was a really good play caller, sometimes got too cute, and which he would even agree with. But sometimes if you run those trick plays, they work. It's great. Like Ben Johnson has run tackle eligible passes to Taylor Decker to get a first down that clinches the game. That's different. And if it works, it's really good. I don't know that you're going to be seeing him doing that if he comes here for Andrew Wiley or someone like that, but it's what he's, certainly something that's in his arsenal that kind of, first of all, I think it makes it fun for players, but only if they work, because if they don't, then it's not as fun. Then here's a quote from Jared Goff that I'm going to put up as well. And let's see what he said. I'm going to find it here on the story that I'm scrolling through. So bear with me for a second and I will get to it. So Goff told ESPN's Eric Woodyard, constant communication and honesty. He's not afraid to check me and then not afraid to tell me I'm doing shit right. We have a very open communication and relationship where I can come to him and vent. He can come to me and I can also go to him with ideas. Obviously, he's the idea guy, but if I have stuff that I think will work, he'll listen to everything. He's a great listener. Again, another really good quality for any prospective head coach. What does it mean again, it's going to all come down to who do you hire too. So all that stuff is great. The collaboration is great too. And I think sometimes when you get that, you attract people who are bringing ideas to you and it just makes it a better place to work. And I go back to that Shanahan staff and they weren't all ready to be head coaches at that time. And I always kind of laugh at they let all these guys out of the building. Atlanta let these guys out of the building too. So, there's other teams that have done that because they had to travel a journey to get to that point. But the bottom line is they were all smart and talented, and they were here. And part of the reason why like the RG3 year worked is because those guys' collaboration, coming up with creative ideas to make it work for a rookie quarterback with his skill set. Very impressive. And so I think like that's the kind of situation you want. You want to have some young people, and not just young people, innovative people. It doesn't have to be young. You can have some young guys who aren't as innovative. Just being young doesn't make you innovative, but you can't be wedded to a certain, just like, and I felt like certainly with Jack Del Rio times, it was clearly wedded to one way of, the scheme of doing it and blah, blah, blah. And it's why it was up and down. So, there you go. I don't think, but I think if you can create a culture where it's not always like that, well, then I think you're better off. And so I did talk, like I've talked to other coaches, I've talked to other people around the league about him. One coach told me that when you're watching the tape, he felt like guys were wide open. And he said he's heard, he knows he's it. He said that Johnson is innovative, that he's heard really good things about him. He hasn't worked with him, but he knows people who have, and he's got ties to people on that staff. And, hears good things from guys like Mark Brunell, things like that, who is a quarterback's coach for Detroit. And then another guy told me who's worked with him, said he's a bright guy, different skill set, has worked hard on his people skills, has character, work ethic. He said, the question is, can he be the CEO? And we're not going to know that. Nobody's going to know that until he is put in that position. We'll see. That's the big question. That's where there's a roll of the dice on any coach you hire. If it's a guy that people don't want, the quote unquote retreads, even if they had some success, okay, there's a roll of the dice going with that versus the unknown. I've seen them go with the unknowns here. I saw them go with Jim Zorn. Didn't work out. North Turner was an okay coach, but he had terrible communication skills. And, and he also was a little bit more insecure as a coach than you would like. So I think, he was the hot guy back in the day. When they hired him, he was the hot guy, and it didn't work. Now, part of it didn't work because, they didn't get a quarterback until later in his tenure. Maybe they had Snyder not been here and brought in Jeff George, et cetera, and kind of start to ruin things, maybe would have gotten better. But, and his offense was really good, but he was not a great communicator with the players. And I remember talking to a player one time about him, and just like, hey, when we talking to him, it's kind of like he starts and stops sentences multiple times. He goes, well, if he's like that with you guys, how do you think he is with us? So point is, just being the hot coordinator doesn't make you a good head coach. But I do think Norv had some skills, right? I think there were a lot of things he did know. But I think what stopped him too is some of that communication stuff. But I think this guy seems to have, when you watch him on the podium, I think he's a lot better, a little bit more comfortable. So we'll see. Norv was a super smart offensive mind though. Anyway, and I'm not picking on him. My point is that he was the hot guy back in the day, but you need more than just that. And then someone else I talked to in the league said that they loved Adam. Young, progressive, has humility, understands talent, communication, and relationships. This person said selflessness and communication is half the battle as a coach in the NFL. So he's got all that, and we'll see. He's not going to be interviewed in person until sometime next week after the Lions play their championship game against San Francisco. If they lose and he's the number one guy, well, then we'll see how fast it progresses. If the Lions win their Super Bowl, then it's going to be a couple more weeks, but they can interview him next week. So we're going to have so we'll see how long this search process goes on. But I did want to bring you more just about him to answer, like, why is this guy such the hot name right now? And it's not just about, hey, their offense is ranked this and this, because the numbers don't mean squadoosh when you get in front of an entire room of people and you now have to lead the organization. And now you're in a meeting, but then some agent is calling, some player wants to deal with this, and this. So that's why, it's not just going in the room, lock yourself in and just still doing the same stuff you did before. Nope. When you're in charge of everything. That's why it's a CEO type situation. So you're in charge of having to deal with everything that comes your way. And, for example, like, if the training room needs new tables, the equipment guy wants something more. maybe they want you to make an appearance somewhere. That's, sometimes, and I don't think it's going to happen here, but like with the owner, the one good thing for them is that with Josh Harris, he's not a guy that's going to be sitting there every day wanting, like Dan Snyder wanted to meet with and have lunch with you a couple times a week and watch film or whatever. That's not going to be Josh Harris. You're going to check in with him. You're going to talk to him, but it's not going to be in there like, hey, let's watch film today or whatever it is. That's going to help him. But bottom line is it'll be different for him or any first-time head coach, which is why you need a strong GM, somebody who can filter things for you, but then also a very, very, very strong staff. And I think the how detailed he is with the approach in Detroit will help him. And you would think that for their sake, that detail needs to pay off in the hires. Anyway, I'm rambling. That's my time. That's my cue to go. I'll be back on Friday with another podcast. Still going over a lot of coaching stuff, hoping to have a guest and then give you some good insight into more of these coaching candidates, some of their offense, their defense, or whatever it is. And we'll keep on rolling with this, folks. So talk to you next time.